It is Friday, January 22nd, 2021. It is 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and so you know what time it is. It's time for a little bit of coin metal. And it was yet another non-virtual get your ass kicked at Jiu-Jitsu Friday. Did some interesting yet very basic stuff today. And honestly, I'm very glad that we did do as basic a thing as we did. We were doing just like the first thing that we did was the multiple variations on an ankle lock, or not an ankle lock, a leg lock, or a calf lock, yeah, something like that, leg lock. Okay, where you got your opponent's leg through under your armpit, you got your arm under theirs, and you're doing like a, how should I say it, like a rear naked choke almost kind of grip. And we did 4 different phases of that, where we were doing on the inside leg hook, or leg lock rather. We were doing it with the overhand grip, with where you have your right hand on the overhand and your left hand on the underhand, assuming of course you have your opponent's leg off to the left. And then the other one was reaching under, and I honestly liked this one a little better because it's very, very tight. Reaching underhanded under your opponent's leg, and then doing a grip kind of like a rear naked choke, where you put it on the inside of your left hand, and then you grab with your left your left arm rather, on the inside of your elbow there, and then doing over the top with your left hand, and then just popping up a little bit with your hips. Man, that thing was so fucking tight. I mean, I barely did it on my training partner, and he was like, "Oh, tap 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 tap," and then of course we did the other side. So it was 4 different leg locks without having to change seated position at all. And I think the next thing we did that was like a counter to that, where if your opponent does have you in a leg lock like that, just from the standard leg entanglement, where you've got your say your right leg, your shin right up to their crotch, and then your on your outside leg, you have your left leg with your foot at the top of their hip, and you're just like pinching in with your knees and a nice little. Well, the next part was a counter to that, where you reach through your opponent's arm, right, and then you do a rear naked choke grip yourself, to where you've got your top hand is on their tricep, and your other hand is through their arm and cupping onto your bicep, and you yank that back and push your foot through at the same time, and keep your toes up, and that way it gets your leg to such a position in orientation with your opponent that they can't actually squeeze the spot that they're trying to break on you. And so after you got that grip, then you pop the heel off of your hip, hop the heel over, to where you're now sitting like on your opponent's leg, and then basing out and moving it up to an S mount. I always have trouble with the S mount part, and I think the problem that I was having is, I think you have to start that one from the knee. Like I was just bringing myself up to like a standard mounted position, and I was ending up with my leg underneath my opponent. And again, the problem I think was going on there is that I was not leading the position with my knee. And this is something that I was watching the instructor, and it was something that I caught him doing when he was demonstrating it, is that he swung his hips out to where he was landing on his right hip and practically bringing his leg straight up with his knee straight up, and then pulling it into like an angular kind of an S mount. but like he was navigating his hips over a little bit further than I was, and it was the difference that was making a difference in how he was ending up in S mount. So I'm definitely going to have to work on that one a bit more, because the way that I was doing it, I was ending up in the wrong position, and I want to get the arm bar, because if you follow that one through all the way, it's an arm bar setup, and there are other things that can be gotten from there, depending on which way your opponent rolls. If your opponent rolls one way, you can end up getting into a back take position, and so again, it's one of them things. You gotta pick your poison, which one you want to try and get out of. Anyway, let's go ahead and break down with some music. Keep it nice and brief. Like I said, it was a pretty casual day as far as like the volume of different material that we got. And the one thing that I noticed today that I thought was most beneficial was that when I was getting into an ashi position with that leg up under, and I felt like I finally had that feel for my ashi garami back. Like, I've been describing my jiu-jitsu experience as one of like relearning or learning things via osmosis. And it's really not that I'm learning them via osmosis so much as I'm being reminded of them. That I've already got a lot of the material in between my ears, and it's just a matter of being reminded of it, And so, like I said, today when I was doing an ashi, I felt really, really tight on it. And I think that I could probably close out a leg lock again if I really, really tried. Anyway, like I said, let's go ahead and throw down with some music. And we're going to go with body count, because that's what we do. And it just happens to be playing in the background. And I keep forgetting about this song. I like it a lot. And so let's go ahead with it. Necessary Evil by Body Count. First Dance here on Coin Metal. And that was Slipknot with the -1. And so, just digging around today, and sometimes I love Twitter and sometimes I hate Twitter, because as much as I can find everything that I want to find, I end up completely distracted and on 8 billion different fucking threads of shit. And so, as far as what we're going to get into today, I did track down this neat little thread concerning the quote-unquote double spend issue that recently happened on the Bitcoin network. I do have to make one more minor adjustment, but I can do this at the same time. Anyway, this is I guess it's a good explanation of the situation. I'll determine that on my own, but it came from a recommendation if I can find it. Oh shit! No. Yesh kebab. I lost it. Damn it. Ah, here we go. I was trying to find the tweet that started this thing as far as my attention to it, because somebody had recommended it. And they said something to the effect of it being the best explanation of what happened. So this one is by Lucas Newsy, and he's on Twitter. And so we'll just go from here. There is an alarming amount of misinformation fueled by the media on what exactly happened to Bitcoin yesterday and whether funds were quote-unquote double spent. Here's everything you need to know. And this is authored on January 21st, 2020 at 10:40 a.m. Number 2. On the 18th, a user broadcast a transaction with very low fees. When users underpay fees, their transactions get stuck because miners have more profitable opportunities. Actually, they reorganized the block instead of processing the transactions in an as-received fashion, which, if you read the motherfucking Bitcoin block white paper, that's exactly how they're supposed to do it. But they fucked everything up because they want to take all the most profitable transactions and organize them in a block so they get the most fees. And by the way, I predicted that would happen a long time ago when they were just talking about adding minor donations. Anyway, continuing on. On the 18th, the user broadcasts a transaction with very low fees. When users underpay fees, and there is no such thing as underpay, you fucking pay what you want for your transaction. Don't let anybody tell you different. Their transactions get stuck because miners have more profitable opportunities, not if you don't give them to them. Users are left with two options. A, wait until the fee levels drop, which is the best option. B, tell miners they will increase the fees, which is stupid because you're giving in to their extortion. 3. The most popular way to B, increase fees of an already broadcast transaction is through a replace by fee transaction. Simply put, replace by fee is a copy and paste of the original transaction with higher fees and an explicit instruction to favor the new transaction instead. 4. Nearly a day passed after our infamous user broadcast the original transaction, and the miners did not include it. So, the user decided to issue an RBF on the 19th with higher fees, but not high enough. And the transaction was stuck again, because they gave into extortion once, but not enough extortion. 5. A couple hours later, the user decided to bump fees up again via a second RBF. This time around, the user paid enough fees. 6. So, to recap, the user broadcast a total of 3 transactions. Number 1, December 18th, 1011 UTC, or 2211 UTC, at 1 Satoshi per byte, which to me is extortion anyway. 2, December 19th, at 2122 UTC, they bumped it up to 9.4 Satoshis per byte. Number 3, on December 20th at 1232 UTC, they bumped it up to 14.3 Satoshis per byte. And here's where things get a little more complex. Number 7, at around 1:18 a.m., the blockchain split into 2 versions, which is an entirely normal occurrence, a fundamental part of how Bitcoin works. When this happens, +1 times per month, miners need to converge on a single version of events, which often takes around 1 block or 10 minutes. Number 8. However, by the time the user broadcast the 3rd transaction, fee levels had quieted down and the chain was split. One miner picked up the first low-fee transaction for their version of the chain. The other miner picked up the 3rd, the highest fee RBF transaction. Number 9. The thing about RBFs is that they're entirely optional. Miners decide which transaction to pick. In this occasion, it might have looked like a malicious, quote, double spend inflation, but it is a completely normal event. Number 10. The chain was split for 1 block, again, normal, but ultimately the miner on the branch with the low fee transaction ended up winning. The important thing to know is that yes, there might be different versions of the same transaction, but only one will ultimately be accepted. 11. And it gives us a follow this man made a helpful timeline of events using the coin metrics data. Interesting. He gave us a nice little diagram. Anyway, continuing. 12. Again, RBFs and stale blocks is business as usual. No reason to freak out, no inflation, no double spend was actually confirmed. Just a ton of loud ignorance and misinformation. Number 13. This is a wake-up call for crypto media. Looking at you, crypto, and you, Cointelegraph. And I'm... Who is crypto? It's Bloomberg Crypto. Yeah, because I did notice that Bloomberg had made a big-ass stink about this before I actually came back to Twitter and found this thing. Anyway, continuing on. You benefit by serving crypto ads. I urge you to, at the very least, understand your responsibility and step up your technical game. How about sponsoring a Bitcoin developer? 14. Another clarifying point. BitMEX Research is doing an amazing job for the community with forkmonitor.info and text transaction stats or TX stats info. We'll look at that one. Their depiction of what happened was accurate. Unfortunately, their post was grossly misrepresented for clickbait. 15. Don't know how I missed this, but make sure to check out Hasufi's excellent article on this, which goes into much richer detail into what happened, and we might actually do that. We might actually want to follow that one up with that. Let's see here, if he put any additional ones on this. Well, it looks like that was the end of the thread as far as we're concerned. Yeah, I thought that was an excellent explanation of the events. Thank you very much, Lucas. See, I think that this demonstrates very, very little, except for one key thing. There's this, I don't know how to describe it. There's an intentional level of, how should I say it, ignorance. And it's kind of, I think it's fostered by the fact that there are so many people lining up as third parties saying, hey, yo, we'll do it all for you, man. You don't even have to think about it. It's just numbers to you. You know, you'll look at it and you'll know how much money it's worth. Everything will be cool, man. You have all of these entities volunteering to make it understandable for you. And really, what they're doing is disempowering you, because it's like this. It's the difference between you driving your own vehicle, repairing your own vehicle, tending to your own vehicle, fueling your own vehicle, and somebody else doing it for you, and or you taking the bus or train or plane or some other conveyance that somebody else is driving for you, that is owned by somebody else, that is no property of yours, and that you are forced to accept as is. You get on the bus, there's no chair, no seats available except for one that's covered with fucking puke. Then I'm sorry, man, that's your fucking chair. Too bad. Should have kept your car. At least then you would have had a choice as to whether or not you sat in puke or fucking had to stand the whole ride. I mean, there's choices no matter where we go in life, but, you might as well keep them as pleasant as possible while you can, right? Or if you can. So, again, this whole thing, Bloomberg, get off your ass. It's really not that it's not that fucking difficult for you to get into the game and be doing this at a ground level. And I really think that legislators, they need to completely get away from the idea of trying to manage cryptocurrency from the outside. You cannot. The only way you can actually participate in an effectual manner is directly in it. And while I'm not suggesting that's something you should do, I am suggesting that is the best way to do any kind of governance. But what you're going to find is that you're not in it alone, and that you are competing with other people for the block reward. And personally, I think this is the best way that governments probably should. I take it back. They should actually be participating on this level, where you enlist volunteers who'll be counted as you. And of course, you'll have your own little hash farm here or there. But it gives you some depth of understanding exactly what's going on. And of course, you'd be able to utilize whatever funds that you mined as the government saw fit. Now, whether or not you would be able to continue to have miners without having taxpayers, well, that's a whole different question. But again, these have to be public networks. They have to be something that the public can participate in. And I know this sounds kind of weird because some of us are still looking at cryptocurrencies in terms of a criminal enterprise. And they're nothing of the sort. It's no more criminal than a fucking racetrack. You got like an Olympic race going on, some fucking 10K race or something like that. Are people betting on it? Do you really give a shit? They probably are, but do you really give a shit? No, you just care about winning the race. That's your only real concern. Whatever higher order of commerce is utilized by the race happening itself, it's beyond your concern. Your biggest concern is being the first to the finish line, and that's it. Because that's where the block reward is, and it makes it all worth it. And as a matter of fact, if there are higher order markets on top of it, it makes it that much more valuable. But we're going to go through these phases. Sometimes I wonder why I even bothered, to make a point about it, other than I feel that there's not enough voice given to this perspective of crypto, and that a lot of money and a lot of innovation is sitting on the sidelines that should otherwise be invested in the fucking game. Attention that is wandering off doing other shit, like I don't know, like virtual shit. I don't know how to explain it. There's a lot of people that should be interested in this, should be participating in this, that currently are not. And that's fine. It's all optional. There's no gun to your head. But that's the same reason why it's beyond expectation for government to be able to look in from the outside and be able to say, hey, y'all got to do it like this. Fuck you. I'll just colo into a jurisdiction that you don't have any control over, you don't have any oversight in, and you just lost whatever business, whatever commerce could have possibly been directly, observably occurring in your area. It's a disservice, really. When you think about it, it's like if you're in Oklahoma and you got really, really, really dirt cheap electricity, and you've got people around you that are mining, trying to take advantage of that little break on electricity that they're getting by living where they are, right? Only they can't indicate that they are there because the governor or the state legislature or whatever, they drew up some shit that makes the cryptocurrency more taxable, makes it where you got to get a special permit, got to get a license, blah, 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 blah. And so, as far as the rest of the planet is concerned, the mining is actually happening in Mongolia. and because of that, no other miners want to move to where you are and take advantage of that cheap electricity and be circulating that monetary activity within your jurisdiction. They're looking at the coin metrics in the hash distribution, and they're like, oh man, look at all the hash power that's coming from Mongolia. they must be getting really cheap rates on electricity. We're going to go ahead and scout that out. And maybe they find out that, in Mongolia there is relatively cheap electricity in some jurisdiction or another, and they decide they want to set up there. All of a sudden, all the people that would be in that building tending those miners and setting all that shit up, they're in Mongolia now, rather than some area of Oklahoma where the electricity is really, really cheap. And I know this is kind of like a protracted explanation, but a lot of you don't really conceptualize this stuff this way. And I only know about it this way because I'm immersed in it for 10, 16 hours a day. The point being that we really need this, as much of it on the surface, so that we can really make an honest evaluation. Because again, otherwise we're missing out. There's fucking money being made by somebody else that really should be in your pocket. Fuck that guy. So, speaking of fuck that guy, I got this thing here. It's on decrypt.co. Tether users flee to Tron from Ethereum amid high fees. Transactions using Tether dollar-pegged stablecoins on Tron blockchain are outpacing those on Ethereum. And this is by Alexander Behrens. I don't know how to pronounce that, Alex. Sorry. Anyway, this is authored on January 22nd, 2021. And here we go. Tether transactions are on the rise, but in a different place than you might expect. High fees on Ethereum appear to be pushing people to use Tron for transfers of Tether, the world's most popular stablecoin. There have been more Tether transactions, though not higher volume, on the Tron blockchain than the Ethereum blockchain every day thus far in 2021, according to blockchain data provider Coinmetrics. That's quite a spike in Ethereum housing more than 50% more Tether tokens than the Tron blockchain. It could be a warning sign that high fees will drive crypto traders to alternative blockchains, threatening Ethereum's position as the de facto center of the crypto trading universe. Founded in 2014, Tether provides dollar-pegged stablecoins on blockchains such as Ethereum, Tron, and Solana. Hold on. I don't know if they'll mention this later on in the article, but originally they were on they were on Bitcoin, and I don't know if they were originally on Omnichain to connect with Bitcoin, or it was Counterparty, one of those two. Anyway, point being, they used to do it on Bitcoin's blockchain. Now they just value their shit in Bitcoin. Anyway, continuing on. Stablecoins are used by crypto trader as stable assets like cash as a means of moving out of positions in volatile cryptocurrencies. They also make many crypto transactions easier by providing a more familiar currency unit for settling debt or reporting interest rates. Tether is by far the largest provider of stablecoins, with a circulating supply of approximately $25 billion, a figure that increased nearly 4x over the course of 2020. Tether claims all Tether tokens are 100% backed by cash and cash equivalents, but skeptics routinely question that assertion, and Tether remains the subject of an ongoing lawsuit in New York State over an alleged cover-up of the loss of more than $800 million in customer funds. Transaction fees on Ethereum have remained elevated at an average of more than $6 per transaction for all but 2 days so far in the new year. They went above that level only a dozen days over all of 2020, according to blockchain data provider BitInfo Charts. Transaction fees on Ethereum started rising above historic levels in May 2020, thanks to a boom in Ethereum-based DeFi applications that seek to replicate financial services like loans, asset swaps, and interest on customer deposits via decentralized networks using smart contracts. By contrast, Tron fees amount to fractions of a cent per transaction on average. Tron founder Justin Sun has previously discussed copying Ethereum as a means of bringing more activity to the Tron blockchain. Even so, the total value transferred on the Ethereum blockchain using Tether tokens has remained nearly double that transferred via Tron since January 2020, indicating that the increased number of Tron-based Tether transactions are coming from relatively small traders dealing in lower amounts. Nevertheless, high fees on Ethereum may incentivize Tether users to jump ship and bring some much-needed vitality to competitor chains like Tron, as long as rivals can keep up their own low fees. Yeah, I think I've predicted that multiple times on this show, as a matter of fact. And to the gentleman, Bitcoin dude, who originally posted this, I'd suggested that at one point or another they'd probably transition to Doge. I mean, realistically, it's like 8 times the transaction throughput of Bitcoin, and it's way, way cheaper than, probably even cheaper than Tron. But yeah, these currencies will see their utilization put to it. It's like they're either going to provide the utilization and the capabilities that people require, or they will die. It's really, really simple. But they will be tested. And that's for damn sure. Anyway, the next thing I got up here, if I can find it. Let's see here. Yeah, I wanted to touch one more time on this double spend business. And if it's too much like repetition or whatever, we'll transition to something else. Anyway, this one's on insights.deribit.com. Was there a Bitcoin double spend on January 20th, 2021? And so, yeah, here we go. Yesterday, BitMEX Research tweeted that their fork monitor had picked up a double spend on the Bitcoin blockchain. Understandably, the word double spend has people worried on social media, so I quickly want to shed some light on what actually happened and what this means for Bitcoin. BitMEX Research, there was a stale Bitcoin block today at height 666,833. Slush Pool has beaten F2 Pool in a race. It appears as if a small double spend of around 0.0006263 Bitcoin, approximately $21, was detected. Bitcoin Research, a transaction in the losing chain sent $21 to the address blah blah blah, and a transaction in the winning chain which spent the same inputs only sent 0.00014499 Bitcoin to this address. And it gives you the visual on it, from was this from Coinmetrics? I think it might be from their own page, actually. Anyway, continuing on. Stale blocks. In Nakamoto consensus, all nodes automatically switch to the heaviest valid chain. Actually, it's supposed to be to the longest valid chain, not the heaviest. This allows them to synchronize their local ledger state, who owns what, with that of everyone else. Occasionally, 2 mining pools find a new block at about the same time, and these blocks had the same accumulated difficulty. Then some nodes switch to one block, and all other nodes switch to the second block. For a short time, the Bitcoin network is then bifurcated, but odds are that the bifurcation is resolved once the next block is found. For example, Imagine that some miners were mining on block 666,833A, and some miners were mining on block 666,833B. One of them found block 666,834. This blockchain will have a higher accumulated difficulty, and all nodes still on 666,833A will automatically abandon their blockchain and switch to the new canonical one. This is exactly what happened in the Bitcoin network, as both Slush Pool and F2 Pool found the same block, 666,833, at the same time. The tie was broken after Binance's mining pool found block 666,834 and F2 Pool's block became stale. Now, stale blocks occur relatively frequently and are absolutely nothing to worry about. But what about the suspected, quote, double spend? What is a double spend? There are two popular definitions for what a double spend is, a technical and a practical one. Technically speaking, a double spend occurs when a payment received by some party, transaction T1, is first included in the blockchain and then removed at a later point. This can only happen if the block containing that transaction itself has become stale. Further, it is not enough that the new blockchain does not include T1. Otherwise, sorry about that. Otherwise, it could still be included in the next block. In a double spend, if one of the inputs to T1 must have been spent by conflicting transaction T2. Since the input has been spent in T2, T1 then becomes invalid and is removed from the network. We call this a double spend not because the user has been double spent, but an input to the transaction has. But practically speaking, it also matters if T1 is less or greater than T2 actually changed the ownership of coins from one user to another. In other words, the recipient of the T1 coins would have to send other funds or products in exchange. Here's an example of that actually happened. Number 1, an attacker deposits $1 million in ETC on an exchange. They then exchange the ETC for $1 million in BTC and withdraw it. The attacker then double spends the exchange by creating the competing transaction T2, where he spends the same coins that originally went to the exchange back to themselves. The attacker now has $1 million in ETC plus $1 million in BTC. The exchange is short $1 million in Bitcoin. Step 3 is the equivalent of bouncing a check that is extremely difficult to do in the Bitcoin network. Reversing T1 requires reversing all blocks on top of T1, which would require the attacker to control the large amount of hash power. So the attack can only be executed by miners or by someone running enough hash power on the market, like NiceHash. Note that none of the biggest coins can be attacked in this way. If someone rented all SHA-256 hash power from NiceHash, about 500 petahashes per second, that would be about 0.4% of Bitcoin's current hash rate, 123 exahashes per second. Essentially, all double spend events, including this recent one, are completely harmless. Even in the event that a large miner, instead of an accidental race between two mining pools, deliberately orphaned the block containing T1, they couldn't have monetized the attack as long as the recipient followed the common 6 confirmation rule of thumb. In this case, we simply saw a conflicting T1 and T2 both be confirmed at different times. As we'll see now, there are good reasons for a Bitcoin user to broadcast such conflicting transactions. Replacing your own transactions. Whenever users broadcast a transaction to the network, they participate in a first price at auction. By attaching a fee to their transaction, they hope miners will include it in a block. Rational miners tend to fill their blocks to the brim with the highest paying transactions because that gives them the most profit. But, unlike regular auctions, the block space market has a quirk. If a bid didn't win the block space it was bidded for, it's not withdrawn but automatically enters the next auction. That can be a big problem if the bid remains too low to be included, leaving the transaction and the respective coins stuck for a long time. So, users need a way to bump fees on an already published transaction. A useful side effect is that users can bid lower on their transaction fee rates because they always have the option to bump the fee later. That makes block space auctions more efficient. Finally, fee bumping can be necessary to close payment channels, ergo in the Lightning Network. Uncooperative closes have hard deadlines, and missing that deadline because of insufficient fees could result in a loss of funds for users. Users can bump their transactions in 3 ways. Number 1, child pays for parent, CPFP. Number 2, transaction accelerators. Number 3, replaced by fee. Child pays for parent allows the receiving user to spend up a transaction if the sender has attached an insufficient fee. To do that, he broadcasts a secondary transaction that uses an output from the unconfirmed transaction as inputs and pays a larger than usual fee. If a miner wants the fee from the child transaction, whose validity depends on the inclusion of the parent transaction, he is now incentivized to include both. For an example of a CPFP transaction, see here, it gives us a nice little link. Transaction accelerators are off-chain markets for confirming transactions that paid an insufficient fee in the on-chain market. These are typically offered by mining pools and exist in free as well as paid variants. A user can paste their transaction ID into the accelerator, and then the mining pool will include it with a higher priority. Since no signatures are necessary, they can be used by the sender and the receiver, as well as anyone else. Examples via BTC and BTC.com. Replaced by fee allows a user to create a replacement transaction that spends at least one of the same inputs as the same stuck transaction, but pays an additional fee. If it spent none of the same inputs, it would be a separate transaction altogether. Apart from bumping the fee on a stuck transaction, transaction replacement is useful for power use cases like iterative payment batching. While regular batching combines many payments into the same transaction and then publishes them, it's equally possible to first publish a transaction and then iterate on the transaction by adding more inputs and outputs after it has been broadcast, but before a miner has included it in a block. The transaction in question Getting to the actual point, what actually happened in blocks 660-68331 and 660-683-833-2 and 660-683-834. As Bitcoin engineer and researcher 0xB1OC shows in this diagram, a user, let's call her Alice, broadcasts 3 competing transactions, each of them updating the fee rate compared to the previous one. The first one had a fee rate of 1 Satoshi per bit, which was too low to be included in a block. So about 23 hours later, she decided to replace the transaction using RBF with a higher fee of 9.4 Satoshis per bit. Note that Alice had waited almost an entire day at this point, and her transaction still wasn't mined before she broadcast the replacement transaction. The new fee rate, however, was still too low, and so she replaced it again with yet a higher fee rate another 3 hours later. This analysis was later confirmed by BitMEX research as well. So, was it a double spend? We established that users can use RBF to replace transactions before they are confirmed. The updated transactions will often have different outputs from the first transaction, as users are trying to cancel the previously stuck transaction and send it back to themselves. This is almost certainly what happened with Alice's replacement transaction 2 and 3. More on that in the addendum. I feel like we're getting back into the woods on this one. Let's see here. Well, we'll keep going anyway, because it looks like there is probably additional information here. As a result, the different transactions can float in the network at the same time. When the miners include 2 conflicting but not harmful transactions, a previously included transaction can become invalid. That makes it initially seem like a double spend. While it is theoretically possible for double spending to occur on the Bitcoin network, it is not usually a serious concern. Here are some useful heuristics for when you should panic. The value of the invalidated transaction is in the tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. This is the minimum it would take for miners to profitably, quote, bounce a check, considering that such a double spend could seriously damage Bitcoin's reputation and market value, and the hardware used by the miners is worth tens of billions of dollars. For comparison, today's transaction in question was about $25. Exchanges or other large entities would not accept such a large transaction as final without waiting for a more reasonable number of confirmations. So, an attacker couldn't actually bounce a check by replacing a single block. They likely would have to replace 10 plus blocks. This requires most of the existing miners to collude with each other and risk destroying their investment in mining hardware at the same time. Like many debates, this comes down to definitions of the word double spend. I offered 2 of them today, one of which is technical and refers to the double spending of an input, not an actual user. An input double spend has clearly taken place, but it has zero effect on other users. A double spend in the practical sense is like bouncing a check after another user. We can say with very high certainty that this has not taken place for several reasons. Number 1, the presence of other far more likely explanations, such as a user, not a miner, invalidating their own transaction. Number 2, the absence of other factors that we would expect in a harmful double spend, namely a much higher invalid transaction and a much larger number of stale blocks. Since the media is quick to pick up on terms like double spend, I think we should be careful not to use it when none of the heuristics point to a double spend in the harmful sense having taken place. Instead, I would suggest that a quote transaction has been invalidated, which has a much broader meaning and includes many ways a user might deliberately cancel a transaction. Addendum. What did Alice try to do? So we have established that this was certainly not a double spend where miners deliberately replace one blockchain with a higher difficulty one to bounce a very large check. It had no miner involvement and was simply a stale block. However, many people still curious about what the nature of the different transactions published by Alice was. Why did she replace the original transaction to begin with? Was this maybe an attempt to double spend a merchant who accepts, quote, zero confirmation transactions? We can immediately rule out the latter because almost an entire day passed between the initial transaction and the first replacement transaction. But it might still be interesting to explore who Alice spent coins to. While we can't know who controls the outputs respectively, we can use some heuristics to solve the puzzle. Number one, inputs can be ignored because we know those must be controlled by the user. Number two, a transaction with one output is almost always an internal transfer, meaning transfer between wallets of the same user. It rarely happens that you have exactly the right input in your wallet to pay someone else. Number three, a transaction with two outputs often pays one third party and spends the rest back to the user, a so-called change output. Putting the puzzle pieces together, we can see that transactions 2 and 3 have only one output, meaning Alice probably controls those outputs. Transaction 1 shares one output with transaction 3, so the same would apply here. This leaves only the second output transaction, 3JALVP, to be unaccounted for. To answer this question, we need to make a small detour. Why did the lower fee transaction, 1 sat per byte, win? Does Slushpool hate money? The answer is no. Slushpool behaved exactly like they are supposed to. The reason is either Alice or her counterparty employed the other technique that we previously discussed, CPFP, to get their transaction confirmed. In other words, she made a previously unknown fourth transaction that included the stuck output from the transaction A13C2BD to address 3JALVP as its only output in the same block. As we can see here, the new transaction paid a much higher fee rate, approximately 46.3 satoshis per byte, that was enough to pay for both transactions. Since the inclusion of transaction 1290376 is conditional on the inclusion of transaction A13C2BD, Slushpool had to include both. By sending the funds from 3JALVP, we can know with very high certainty that the funds did reach their target destination and were not in fact double spent. We know this because only someone who controls the private key 3JALVP could have signed the CPFP transaction that eventually got it confirmed. There's a very small chance that Alice was trying to send to a third party Bob, who got tired of waiting for the money to arrive, so he spent the unconfirmed output to him using CPFP. But it's far more likely that this was simply Alice spending money between her own wallets and or experimenting with different ways to bump the transaction fee. Hence, we can conclude that all outputs were indeed controlled by Alice. Yeah. So that was a little deeper explanation. You know, it's just a product of a all-volunteer network, and not all of them processing the same information the same way, and of course receiving different information and running forward with it. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down with some music. And so, you know, it's Within the Ruins is playing right now. Really like them. Let's go ahead and go with Elite by Within the Ruins here on Coin Metal. And that was Vola with In Mazes. And so, what else do I got here? Got this next thing here, and I find this really interesting because I don't believe that Bitcoin should have a de facto, like, core group that's deving for it. I really believe that anybody who feels there is a tweak that's required to Bitcoin should be submitting fucking GitHub submits and get on that, you know, and as such. So I got this thing here. It's on CoinDesk.com. Bitcoin Core lead maintainer steps back, encourages decentralization. And this is by Alyssa Hertig, and it was authored on January 22nd, 2021 at 2:34 Eastern or Pacific Standard Time, PM. Bitcoin Core lead maintainer Vladimir von der Laan has decided to take, quote, even more of a background role for the sake of further decentralizing the project, according to a new blog post. Bitcoin Core is the key software underpinning the Bitcoin network, while van der Laan's work is mostly, quote, janitorial in nature, making sure the project's code proceeds smoothly. Some in the community view him as a leader of sorts. As van der Laan puts it, he's become sort of a, quote, centralized bottleneck. His announcement comes after finding himself in the midst of a controversy on Thursday. Some Bitcoin users didn't like his decision to pull the white paper from BitcoinCore.org following the legal threats from Craig Wright. But von der Laan maintains that this decision to pull back from Core is one he's been thinking about for a while. Quote, I will start delegating my own tasks and decreasing my involvement. I do not intend to stop contributing to Bitcoin or even to the Bitcoin Core project, but I would like to remove myself from the critical path and take even more of a background role, he wrote. Decentralizing Bitcoin Core development. He thinks this move will help to decentralize the project, a digital currency that is supposed to not have any leaders. Quote, one thing is clear, this is a serious project now, and we need to start taking decentralization seriously, von der Laan wrote. His decision is part of a much larger effort to further decentralize the project. For instance, 2020 saw a wave of Bitcoin companies doling out grants to developers working on the underlying protocol full-time. Exchange OKCoin, for instance, is funding Marco Falchi, who is the most active maintainer behind von der Laan in terms of commits, code changes that have been successfully added to the project. Popular exchange Coinbase is now supporting two developers as well, after receiving many requests to do so from the community. Pardon me. Several other companies have joined them in doling out grants over the last year. Bitcoin Core contributor John Newberry launched nonprofit Brink for mentoring and funding more developers as well, in an effort to get even more contributors involved, particularly from diverse backgrounds, i.e., got to make sure they're not white. Indeed, von der Laan notes in his post that he's no longer the most active Bitcoin Core maintainer, as several others have joined the ranks over the years. Plus, he outlines other ideas for decentralizing the project. For instance, BitcoinCore.org is one of the major websites where users can download new versions of the Bitcoin Core code, but it is privately owned and centralized. He suggests moving it to an organization. Quote, Bitcoin is quite different in some of the requirements here from other, quote, free and open source software projects. So we'll have to develop some tools as we go, von der Laan wrote. We could also definitely use some help there. He has asked other developers to step up to take his place as the leader of the weekly Bitcoin Core development meeting, where developers discuss passing next steps. Yeah, so anyway, or pressing next steps. So, the thing of it is, my understanding was originally the Bitcoin Core developers were paid by Blockstream, or at least some of them were. And I don't know if that's still the case or that was the case or whatever, but I believe that, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe there was like a significant amount of money they were given a big chunk of money every month in terms of Bitcoin. And I don't remember what the amount was, but even if it was like half a Bitcoin every month, that'd be like, $16,000. And so when you look at it, I think that there's probably been some sort of change with regard to that like originally the Bitcoin Core developers were, quite richly rewarded by the performance of Bitcoin. And so, they're probably like decentralizing in that they can't pay him anymore, or they can't afford to pay him anymore, or they just simply decided to stop paying him. Said, hey, you contributed a lot of great stuff, and we really appreciate your contribution and stuff, but we can't really afford to keep paying you half a Bitcoin every month, so we're going to have to terminate that. But hey, if you still want to make some commits, you have all the access you need to the GitHub repository, and of course we'll have to peer review all of your submissions and all that, but nonetheless, you'll have access. So, that to me is probably a more likely scenario than what this gentleman is speaking of. It's like, they covered the fact that other entities have ponied up funds for Bitcoin developers, in the forms of like grants and whatnot. But I would imagine they're probably not as significant as what Bitcoin, Blockstream was originally giving these guys. But there was a thing in there about Thursday, or the debacle concerning Craig Wright, and I wanted to get into that. I think I've got a few articles about it other than this, but I want to go ahead and go with this one. SunCoinDesk again. Bitcoin.org rebutes Craig Wright's meritless copyright claim on the Bitcoin white paper. Daniel Palmer wrote this, and it was on January 21st, 2021 at 2:01 a.m. PST. Pardon me. But yes, penis. Quote, we will continue hosting the Bitcoin white paper and won't be silenced or intimidated. Others hosting the white paper should follow our lead in resisting these false allegations. So said Bitcoin.org, an independent open source project that aims to support Bitcoin development, in a response on Thursday to an attempt by nChain chief scientist Craig Wright to force the site to take down its copy of the Bitcoin white paper. While Bitcoin was created by the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto, who has yet to be identified, Wright has repeatedly made claims that he is Satoshi, and apparently contrary to the ethos of the founder, is attempting to claim he owns the copyright to Bitcoin's intellectual property. Wright, who is a key advocate for the rival cryptocurrency Bitcoin SV for Satoshi's vision, has now had his lawyers send out letters to several entities, seeking them to remove copies of the white paper from their websites, according to Bitcoin.org. Wright is said to be claiming the copyright to the white paper, the, quote, Bitcoin title, and ownership of Bitcoin.org. Quote, "We believe these claims are without merit and refuse to take down the paper," said the organization. However, the operators of BitcoinCore.org, the website for the cryptocurrency's developer team Bitcoin Core, did take down their copy of the white paper, because they're shitbags. References to it deleted and changes merged on GitHub, according to Bitcoin.org. Quote, "By surrendering this way, the Bitcoin Core project has lent ammunition to Bitcoin's enemies, engaged in self-censorship, and compromised its integrity." Dude, they never had any integrity. What are you fucking talking about? The organization said the Bitcoin white paper was included in the original Bitcoin project files. The project was published over permissive and free MIT license by Satoshi Nakamoto. As such, Bitcoin.org said, quote, "There is no doubt that the legal right to host Bitcoin.org said, quote, "There is no doubt that it has the legal right to host the white paper." Quote, "Furthermore, Satoshi Nakamoto has a known PGP public key. Therefore, it is cryptographically possible for someone to verify themselves to be Satoshi Nakamoto. Unfortunately, Craig has been unable to do this," the post adds. Fucking, this guy is like the worst fucking rash that will not ever seem to, it never seems to go away. You know, I mean, really, he's lied in fucking court. He's modified papers to make it look like it's something it's not. And yet these people still fucking take him seriously when he files court briefs. Stop taking this asshole seriously. He's just that. He's a lying sack of shit. And you need to treat him like that. I mean, it fucking annoys me that anybody lends any kind of credence at all to his claims of being Satoshi. I mean, really, all you have to do is reread the white paper. You know, Bitcoin's capacity issues, they are imposed by the miners, the current miners. Now, there's nothing to suggest that tomorrow 1 million motherfuckers out there who mined at one time couldn't start mining and simply eliminate the little implementations that have been added to Bitcoin to make it fulfill roles that it was never intended to fill. It was not intended to be some sort of base layer that banks and other third parties sell you access to. It was meant to be peer-to-peer digital cash, meaning you, miner, will be able to TX on this network, transact on this network with other miners and other people that aren't necessarily miners. Of course, because not everybody really wants to be a miner, but it's better for the network if you are a miner. It's better for you individually if you're a miner. It's better for pretty much everybody if more people are miners, because it adds to the robustness of the network. I mean, and especially if you're actually hosting the blockchain, you're not trunicating your fucking branch cutting or whatever the fuck that pruning. That's the word, pruning. You know, as long as you're doing it that way, I don't have any problem with it or whatever. Maybe you're just, you know, a retail recipient and you want to be able to take Bitcoin as payments. You know, you host a truncated version of the Bitcoin blockchain. That's fine. That's you. I mean, you contribute to it what you want, but the more you contribute to it, the better. You know, and like I've told you guys multiple times on this show, there's been this focus of trying to force everything down to a narrower and narrower grouping of beneficiaries to all of our activity. You know, whether that be, you know, you're on Twitter and all that, and who's actually benefiting from you being on Twitter, or you are a holder of Bitcoin, and when you want to spend your Bitcoin, what kind of freedom you still have in doing so. I mean, we talked about that RBF debacle where the person actually submitted the transaction 3 times trying to get the fucking thing to go through. And I would imagine they were paying a really significant chunk of change for that $25 transaction. And by the way, they only talked about the $25 transaction. They didn't say what it was for. You know, was that the fee? Was that the fee itself? I mean, I would imagine whatever it was, like 49 point something fucking satoshis per byte, that if it was a significant transaction, the $25 fee would be, you know, in line with that. But nonetheless, it's like, you really shouldn't have to spend that much money. You should not have to go through that much bullshit. And as a matter of fact, if that person did not bother to go through that bullshit, if that person just put through the one transaction in, you know, at hour 23 waiting for their first confirmation, they should have just said, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna sleep on it, I'll wake up tomorrow, first thing I'll check this transaction, see if it's gone through then. If it hasn't gone through then I might, like, you know, try and get in contact with somebody at F2 Pool or Slush Pool or something like that and say, hey, yo, can we fast track this thing? I mean, like, where's a free accelerator I can resubmit this transaction to and maybe get it fulfilled? Because I need to do that. I really need to move this money in, and I think a fee higher than what I'm willing to put up is unreasonable. But if you could see it in your heart to put forward this transaction, this would be really great for me. And maybe they would do it. You don't know unless you ask. Of course, that would be under the discretion of the pool operator, but again, you don't know until you ask. I've seen them do stuff like that. You know, I mean, I've heard about them doing stuff like that. So it's not beyond question. It's not beyond the capability of the network to do. And having maybe just a little bit more faith in what you're doing. And maybe bothering to educate yourself just a little bit more about it. You know, the way that the network is governed, the way that it operates, that's supposed to be up to you. And, you know, by not mining, you are still contributing. It's a negative contribution. You know, nobody really benefits from it. But it is an indication of your confidence in these projects that you're not mining them. You know, how much is your say really worth to you? And because you can participate on such a level in these networks, there's really nothing saying you shouldn't. Anyway, let's go ahead and throw back down with some music. And as far as where to go, we played a lot of really good stuff tonight. It kind of leaves me at a loss as to where to go with it. I got it. A little bit of Tesseract here. Survival. Here on Coin Metal. And that was Slayer with Live Undead. And it is with that that I'd like to close out this episode. Thank you very much for listening. I certainly do appreciate the support. We will be back again on Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And so until then, I want you all to trade safe, do your homework, and watch out for your own bunghole, because nobody else is going to do it for you. And so as far as our last dance is concerned, I have not picked anything out. Of course not. Can I wish that off? But where to go with it? That's an interesting question. Well, I do have a couple solutions. But which one? Which one? No, not corn. I think I know which one to go with. Here we go. A little bit of Killing Joke, Last Dance, Loose Cannon. Here on Coin Metal. Thank you again for listening, and y'all have an excellent evening, or excellent weekend rather. Good night.